All right, hello everyone and welcome. It is Tuesday, February 12th, and you have finished out your first round of assignments. We are here at the beginning of week 2, and we have a new round of assignments to discuss, plus we have some submissions from last week's composition for peer review. So last week, your main composition or your main assignment was a composition for our first game called 2D Platformer, and you should now have the 9 music files created, along with the 18 sound effects also for the game. You have completed your first round of assets, and this week we will introduce the second game called Angry Bots, which requires a new approach to the music, a new style of music, a new genre of music, the new way you kind of build and set it all up, just to give you another approach to how music for games can be set up and composed. So, as we go throughout this week, if you have any questions from week 1, or certainly any new questions from the new assignments and the new project this week, please reach out and let me know. Didn't really come in on Monday morning to my email inbox on fire or anything like that from people having horrible issues or troubles with the projects or big questions. So I am assuming that everybody is successful with the first round. And so I have here the first submissions. We have 5 submissions today, submitted from, or submitted, I guess, to the, let me do it this way, open this up, submitted to the optional peer review, feedback and peer review assignment on FSO. So let me just go ahead and load this up real quick. I want to just point this out again because we have it available each week, and the more people that submit, I believe the more successful and the more beneficial this is to everybody involved. Let me get here. So here on FSO on each week, I pulled the submissions from the optional feedback and peer review assignment here. And this is a discussion post for everybody to post up. And this one shows up each week, right here in week 2. This will be the one you can submit for next Tuesday, and it just has you submitting your composition in a way that everybody can check out easily on the discussion post. And then I end up pulling your final submission, just because I don't know if anything has changed in between when you might have submitted it on the discussion post and the final submission. Plus, I get access to all the individual 9 files, and we can go into it a little bit more deeply. But make sure you take the opportunity, and hopefully each time there is encourages folks to participate, and each week hopefully we'll get a couple more submissions, because it's all well and good and for you to get individual feedback, and that's certainly a big purpose of this. Everybody will get an individual feedback video with the grade and the assignment for the composition. But here you get to see everybody else's approach. So you know exactly what you did, and we'll go through things to work on and improve. But you'll see everybody else's submissions, and the good stuff, the bad stuff, things to pay attention to, other things to avoid, and people will have different approaches that you might not have even considered. So always good to have more people submit overall, so that we have more of a variety. So I have 5 submissions today. Each track here represents an individual student submission. You can see everybody's last name over here. So if you submitted, you know which one's yours. Of course, as soon as you hear it, you'll know it's yours. But for any particular submission, we have, well, let me do it this way, just so you can visualize the whole assignment. These are all of the intro. Each student has 9 files to submit. This column over here, these are all, not I say intro, these are all of the main loop files. These are the 3 8-bar main loops. These are the 3 2-bar intros, and these are the 3 2-bar endings. They're only set up this way or in this sort of order because that's alphabetically how they import into Logic. So we'll start over here on the main loops. Listening to these, then we'll go, because listening to the main loops first gives us the overall picture of what the composition can and should sound like. Then the intros and endings are mainly how did you get in and out of the main loops. So the first and foremost, the main loops need to loop. Looks like everybody's here. Well, let me do this too. Let me talk about everybody's as a whole. I'll just talk about generally what we're listening for, and then we'll go into everybody's individual one. So we'll talk about the main loops, talk about the intros and the endings, and then we'll go back and address each one. All right, so the main loops need, first and foremost, need to loop. They need to be able to feel like they are consistently playing and can play endlessly. Whenever you reach the end of a particular cue, you need to be able to either return back to the top of the same cue, jump into the next one, or jump into the third one. That means that all 3 of these main loops should be in the same key. They should be at the same tempo and the same time signature to maintain consistency in the composition. They should also use the same instrumentation so it feels like the same band playing the same piece of music. You need to have a strong rhythm to push the pacing of the game forward, nothing too slow or laid back. You should also have a strong melody. Your melody is going to be the element that creates the most change. Throughout the entire gameplay, it's going to be these 3 8-bar cues that are randomly playing back and firing at different times. So they're going to be repeating enough on their own or repetitive enough. So you don't want to make them even more repetitive by taking an 8-bar cue and repeating the same 4-bar phrase twice or a 2-bar phrase 4 times. And you want to make sure that typically your melody, a bit of your progression, baseline, and rhythm also is changing from one cue to the next. It doesn't need to be wildly different, but obvious changes, and the melody, you can have a bit more static and consistent rhythm, harmony, and progression as long as the melody is changing and creating most of the focus. Now, that doesn't mean you should just copy and paste them from one to the next. But if your melody is sitting there just like sitting there on whole notes and it's not moving much more than the chord changes, then you're going to need to have a little bit more interest in either the rhythm or the production or some other aspect of it. So there needs to be variation over the course of each one of these cues. Consistent in the mix. You want to make sure that no one cue is a bit or is quite a bit louder or stronger than the other ones. No one of them is going to stand out. So you want consistency in the production of it and that variation in the composition. So overall, these look, at least visually, these look like they're set up ready to go, like they're set up to loop and transition from one to the next. This one visually looks different in volume, or it's more like density than, well, even volume. These kind of stick up a little bit more. It just looks like there's more going on in the loop 2 and 3 versus the first one here. Other things to watch out for are sometimes you can use things like halftime and double time to make create changes from one cue to the next. But any strong rhythmic change like that, variation, will maybe create too much distraction. Like if everything's at it's like a consistent time, and then one of the cues is a double time. Well, every single time that one's chosen, it becomes a lot more obvious. Like the pacing of the game speeds up, and then it comes back down. So we'll have to pay attention to. Obviously, just looking at this is kind of only half the battle. There, we have to actually listen to them and see what we hear. The intros. All right, the intros need to build up. They need to create a rise in intensity. They need to create anticipation heading into the main loops. The intros, the end of the intros, need to make sense when they transition over to the main loops. It's very important to understand that intro 1, 2, or 3 does not necessarily go into main loop 1, 2, or 3, or I guess better way of saying it. Intro 1 does not necessarily go to main loop 1. Intro 2 does not necessarily go to main loop 2. They are completely random in their combination, and so they have to make sense from one to the next. So you need to create that sense of a rise of an excitement and intensity heading into the main loops, and it makes sure it transitions smoothly into any of the combinations. And that's really where a lot of the challenge of this project is. If I told you to write a 2-bar loop that, or not 2 bars, 2-minute long loop that fits for the particular game, then that probably wouldn't be all that difficult. Maybe just to make a little bit extra work to make it loop at the end. But overall, it would be not much different than a traditional linear composition. The main thing that we're focused on here is the ability to switch and change from these different chunks of music, that you make sure that they make sense in all of their different combinations. The ending cues, we need to make sure that, first and foremost, that they end. They need to create that sort of period at the end of the sentence, the end of the musical phrase. They need to actually reach silence. These look good in the fact that they at least visually, they reach silence. These look like they almost get there. They might get cut off at the end. These have quite a bit of silence at the end. These look like they all hit silence. These look like they get pretty close, probably. So we want to make sure that you watch out for any reverb tail, cymbal crash tails, instrument decay, anything like that that is still just getting down to silence before it make sure it gets that it doesn't get cut off. Endings need to musically, compositionally, they need to resolve whatever was going on in the main loops. So they need to start at the same intensity as the main loops, and then resolve down to, again, that final, that finale, that finish, that strong ending. Whether you end on a single note, single chord, single hit, whatever it is, make sure it doesn't just get cut off. And at least compositionally, these don't look like they do. Other things, you don't have to use the entire 2 bars. You can end on beat 1 of bar 2 or beat 3 of bar 2. You don't have to go all the way to 1, 2, 2, 2, 3, 4, like all the way to the end of bar 2. If you do go all the way to the end of bar 2, then, or something's still fading and you need a little bit of extra room to make sure it gets all the way to silence, that's perfectly fine also, which some of these might be doing here. Otherwise, the intros and endings need to use the same instrumentation. Every once in a while, we'll have an ending that just is missing the drums, like the drummer just stopped playing. So we have to make sure that you have that consistency from one cue to the next. So, at least talking my way through it, that's most of the stuff that we will be paying attention to here. If you have any questions, especially if it is your composition that we're going through, if you can post up any questions in the chat. And yeah, I think we are set to go. Let's go ahead and start out with the first one here. All right, let's take a listen to our single submission here. I have one track with all of the files laid out horizontally on it. I have the 3 main loop files here. These are the 3 8-bar main loops. The 3 2-bar intro files here. And these are 3 2-bar ending files. They're named outros. They should be named endings. And we have to make sure they don't get cut off right at the very end by the end of the file. We're going to start out by listening to these 3 main loops. So great changes in each one, a good energy all the way through. You have the strong kind of drum and bass pattern. You have the strong bass line to kind of support that. You have interesting changes with the melodic ideas in each one of them. You have arpeggiators and pads and all sorts of different layers that are coming together. Good kind of pacing to the music that pushes the energy of the game forward. And strong changes from one to the next. I don't know, at this pace, I think maybe the drum pattern is changing to kind of too strong, like too much, that might create, well, I guess to the style of the music overall, those strong changes do work, but you can definitely tell where the changes from one cue to the next. Instead of kind of getting lost all the way through, you have 3 very well-defined cues, and I think that's more of an issue of the pacing of the music. Maybe consistency in the way you're using the lead synths could also help make them be more consistent. It's really odd because most of the time I'm trying to encourage more variation, but I think a lot of it has to do with the style of music and how each of the layers are being utilized. But honestly, that is going to be something to check out once you get it into the game, to make sure that those strong changes aren't too distracting. Once you get into the game with the animations and the gameplay and all the sound effects, maybe it'll take more of a backseat role and it'll work out just fine. So something to definitely pay attention to in the context of the game. Here are 3 intros. All right, so great production overall even through the main loops, and it fits the style of music very well with these sorts of intros. Pretty easy to do with the builds and kind of the idea of builds and drops and all of that. So you have a good amount of energy utilized through each one of those. And I think these will actually end nicely, but again, you want to either on these bounced files, either put a fade so it actually reaches silence, or let the decay or the audio file capture all the decay of the instrument until it goes to silence, unless it's some ridiculously long reverb or cymbal crash or something that takes 10 seconds to fade out. Let's bring this back up. Here, let me actually separate these out a little bit so we can hear it kind of cut off to silence. So, nice work overall. Compositionally, they resolve very nicely. Let's do something. Oops. I'm just checking the comments. All All right, so I would say that the instrumentation that is focused on as the lead is the same from intro 1 to main loop 1 to ending 1. So they sound like they go together. Here you have that really high synth and the particular sound of the snare. And intro 1, main loop 1, and ending 1 sound similar to each other. A different, again, different kind of snare, different arpeggiator synth sound, but very consistent from intro to main loop to ending. Here it's more. Sounds like an arpeggiated electric organ. So the only concern would be what happens when you get intro 1 to main loop 2 to ending 3 in any combination. Now, the music has so much dynamics and change to it overall that it might just work just fine, along with all the sound effects and the rest of the gameplay. But another thing to consider is the consistency of the instrumentation. If you certainly the focus is whatever unique synth it is to each one of the main loops. If you can hide the other instruments in the back or the harmony layers of the other cues, that would probably help. I don't know if it'll kind of clutter things up, but that would help the consistency overall. Definitely something to watch out for, because you have nailed all of the other aspects, like everything loops properly, it transitions from one to the next. You have a consistent mix. You have a strong energy in the in the intros that build everything up, and everything resolves nicely through the endings. So we're talking about much more of the subjective creative aspects, which is a good place to have the discussion overall. That means everything will function correctly in the game. It'll sound correct. It'll just be, okay, once it's all in the game and it's all playing together, where it's kind of stringing all of the different pieces of music together randomly, and you got your sound effects in there and the gameplay. How does it all sound together? So just some things to consider as you go along. All right. So good work overall. And now we will return it back to the original archive. How about this? Is that better? Still hear me? Excellent. So compositionally, I think everything works. I do want to check something real quick. I need to hear something with some bass, because that's the main thing I heard through here was missing the low end. Well, none of these have low end to them. Sorry. Yeah. All right. So I think the main thing, that I'm hearing is missing the low end. That's the first thing that stands out. Even before I focused on it compositionally, almost feels like, especially since it's live instrumentation, like there might be a phase issue or something like that. But I don't hear any kick. I don't hear any bass line. Guitar work works very well. I hear cymbals and snare, which creates a good rhythm. I mean, I hear a bit of the kick, but it's only the very high frequency of it. So Everything is formatted correctly. Everything transitions correctly. It definitely keeps the energy of the game going. Everything transitions smoothly from one to the next. I want to hear some of these cymbal crashes. See how they... Okay. So they're not like transitioning over one to the next, or there is a cymbal crash on beat one of any particular cue. Over here you went to the hi-hat. Right here. So there wasn't anything that really transitioned over that would get in the way. Always enjoy live instrumentation. Everything fits well overall. Like I said, it'll transition back and forth nicely. The main thing that's just very quickly throwing me off is the missing the low end, because I would expect there to be a nice big bass line in there and kick drum and all that. Let's see how the intros fit against that. So, I like the drums. So, I would say that the guitar and even the lead guitar should be in there, since you have the lead going through each one of these. I think it works pretty well as just kind of like 2 bars of an intro into that. It feels kind of like it's missing, or like the energy, the drummer's going at it, the drummer's doing his job, but the guitar player is not also building things up. So I think you could do a lot with just kind of this rising line off the lead guitar. Ending cues. Cool. This one, again, the mix, this one just sounds bigger than the other two. I don't know if that's a volume thing or if that's an EQ issue, or if it's actually a different guitar. It sounds like a different tone. Yeah, I would say a little bit of the same thing with the as the intro cues. Where some of these could have more movement from the guitar. I think this one pretty well works. Like it goes all the way through da 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 da. You could probably even just end out those solos too, or do something where the the player's just lost control. They've just lost, so the lead guitar does a weird bend thing or a slide or something like that. Just so you could work the more energy from the guitars in the intros and endings. All right, so overall, I think it fits very well. I think it'll work nicely for the game. Add the rest of the, more guitars to the intros and endings, and watch out for whatever aspect that is in the mix where all the low end seems to be missing. All right, a good start. Let's go ahead and check out our next one. Here we go. So I think overall, compositionally, I think it works well. I think that it transitions nicely from one to the next. Everything should fit and flow well together. I would say that this second cue outlines the issue with sometimes going back and forth between like kind of a regular time and a double time kind of feel, mainly because I think I like the second one the most. I like this energy level all the way through. But the setup of 1 and 3, there's a little bit more energy through 3, like some of those ghost notes on the snare help it. They're certainly not as high as it is on the second one there, but there's a strong change when you go from 1 to 2, and I think 1 and 3 sound more the same, but I like 2 overall. So I would probably keep everything at this pace all the way through. Or at least maybe, and you could try keeping like 2 of these at this pace, like maybe bring 3 up there and then have this one even kind of like a quarter time feel, or I guess like if this was the regular time, a halftime feel from that. So I think that's the main, and here's another thing. Maybe when you put it in the game, having it switch around too much will cause too much distraction. Maybe when you put it in the game, you have so much other stuff to pay attention to that it really doesn't cause that much issue in the background. So there is one aspect of us listening to this in Logic is not the way it actually feels in the game, because you have the music plus the switching and the changing, like all the random like intros and outros and the main loops. You have the graphics for somebody to pay attention to. You have the actual gameplay, the fact that they're not entirely paying attention to the music, they're actually playing a game. So there's a lot of other things that kind of gloss over some of the details that we might pick apart when listening to everything in Logic. So one thing to consider is how is the pacing of the game affected when it switches around like this and goes to kind of this halftime, double time feel. My main vote would be just to have everything be at this pace, the pace of number 2. But certainly worth checking out and trying and seeing all the variations of it. So other than that, I think it works out. You have the strong rhythm. You have the piano as the kind of harmonic layer. I'm sorry, the synth is the harmonic layer. Well, no. Sorry, the piano is the harmonic layer and the synth is the lead. Although the piano is the lead here. This is more of the, looks like a clavinet, kind of, some synth. So it actually switches up, which is the lead, which is good. You have more variation, more things more changes to pay attention to. So overall, I think it works. Let's try 3 intros here. I think intro 1 probably works to create the most energy through these 2 bars. I would say, like here, the drums don't do enough of the job to build things up. Like it just takes the last 2 beats of bar 2, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4. And it kind of does a little snare roll. Not as much as the drums do here or here. Oh no, that's just a kick. Here I like the kind of the downward and upward movement. And if the drums could have a bit more build through that. So it's a combination, basically getting all of the drums, all of the harmonic and melodic instrumentation to kind of bring that excitement level up and use all of the different players there. Yeah, those should all transition nicely to the next. Well, actually, one thing would be if something like, I would say this is the one that's the lowest intensity, and if that transitions to this, is it too much of a like an intensity change from one to the next? So all things to test out and listen to in the game. The third one here. Yeah, I want to make sure, do these actually reach silence? They look like they get cut off just a little bit. Yeah. So let's do this. Let's separate them just so we can see if we can hear it. Okay, let's try these. All right, so yeah, definitely they need just a little bit more to fade out. I think, again, it's an intensity difference. This one is moving a whole lot faster, or at least that arpeggiated kind of, I guess I'm going to call it a clav line. This one I think is kind of slower, or just more slower, but less dense. Let's probably put it that way. This one, da, 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 da. So you'd have to work, like, where does that snare sit as it transitions from one to the next? Because I think what you're doing melodically and harmonically all work. They all hit that last note, last chord, fade a little bit to silence. So I think the rhythm is about the only part that would concern me in how it all transitions back and forth. All right, overall, production works very well. I think we got all the pieces that'll fit nicely. So we'll check it out, how it sounds in the game. All right, very good. Let's keep going here. Oops. This one, at least the peaks here seem a bit louder than the rest of them. That just might be a different instrument. Let's see what we have. If you have questions, go ahead and post them up. All right, cool. So I think the kind of the bounce and the energy and the kind of overall vibe of it fits very well with the game. I think it works. I'm just counting in my head. I think it'll work nicely to transition from one to the next. There is, again, there's like an intensity difference, and it's like different elements kind of sticking out differently. So here, the little peaks that I mentioned earlier, those are the open, or the hi-hats, and the syncopated line there. I might have like a little bit of, maybe not, it's kind of like the bounce of the piano. Let's say just a little bit more movement, maybe changing it up in the second half. Let me see if come on. maybe have a little bit more variation in the first half and second half. Yeah, just to create more, you have more room of creating to create that variation. Guilty of repeating. I'll admit that much. Third main loop was trumpets, but I realized the energy would be different. Marimba was my least favorite of the three main loops too. Just wanted to make things try something different. Oops, no. Good. Okay, so I think that points out the thing that I believe might be missing is I think the marimba should be here where you have the piano. I think that's what the main thing is it feels sparse and like the focus and the intensity is in different places. So the marimba, like the piano, should also be here. Well, it is. So when the piano is here, I think the marimba should be here, but kind of farther in the background. This one, piano, and then the brass is more of the lead or has more of the movement. Well, that should be much farther out. Like you could just switch up the roles. So you have brass, you have piano, you have the marimba. Each one of those should be in each of the three cues with a focus on one of them. I like the changes in the drums. And then just use the second 4 bars to create more variation. So I like the pace of it. I like the kind of bounce to it overall. It would just be creating that variation and not having. Again, this one almost needs. Well, I jumped again. So marimba, piano, and drums. You need like a bass line. Bass line would work like here, and that low brass line could just be the bass in each one of them. So I think that's the main thing is the continuity of or consistency of the instrumentation in each one, and then creating more variation in the second half. Because overall, I think it fits nicely. I like you go from here's just kick and hi-hat, which is pretty much all you need. Then here you just go hi-hat snare, and then the side stick. So you've got that sort of variation there, and you've got different leads. Make sure when the low brass becomes the lead, it kind of steps out and is a little bit louder. So yeah, those are the main thing that I would point out through each one, and that would help balance out that initial like focus issue when I first heard it. I was like, which one should I be paying attention to? Because it's switching from one to the next. 3 intros. So this would also point out the fact that if you each one of these has piano in it, but each one of the main loops doesn't focus on the piano. So you should have in these intros the marimba and the piano all helping. So when then they drop down on the one of whatever main loop, they're all of the instrumentation is there. Otherwise, what you're doing is correct. Oops, everything's kind of building up here. Like everything do kind of outlines that last chord and is ready to drop back down on the one. And the other thing would be just, I think I hear the same little drum fill at the end of each one. Or, not really. It's a little different. It does feel like they're all like the same kind of needs velocity. Like that right there. So, yeah, just a little bit more change from one to the next, but add the, like I said, the marimba and piano. Well, piano's in each one of those. And 3 endings. Oops, those are not endings. Cool. Oh, just add that crash in the very last hit. So the only thing to maybe consider with these is that they are too major in their resolution. Like it sounds like I won instead of that I just lost. And having everything else be so, like, again, bouncy and major, you can have, and so clear in its melodic ideas, you can do have a lot of fun with, oh no, you just messed up. So you hit the final, a final dissonant chord, or it ends on minor, or the whole band falls apart, or you can you have that brass in there and give me a wah 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 or something where you sort of give more of the feeling of losing versus succeeding. Not sure here in the chat. Not sure why the audio tail was so long with these either. It's more than likely when I see they look like they have the same amount of audio tail. A lot of times that is because include audio tail is checked. When you bounce, you want to turn this off. For everything that you do in this class, you're going to want to turn this off because it'll just add fake silence to the end of your files, which is fine in a full piece of music, but when these need to be cut and edited and all that stuff. So that's typically what I guess. And also, so I should use some minor chords here. Gotcha. See what you mean. Excellent. Yeah. And I don't know that it needs to, you probably in the first bar are going to be major. And you don't, I mean, compositionally, these are perfectly fine endings. But it lends me to the thought just right off the top that, like I won overall. So these last chords that you hit at the very end, I think they're all beat one of bar 2. 2, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4. Yeah. 1, 2, 3, 4, 2. Yeah, so everything from 2 on should probably, I mean, could be at least to try out having some variation with the minor dissonance in there, or everything falls down, or just kind of falls apart entirely. More variations there. All right. Overall, I think it works well. The main thing would be the consistency through the instrumentation. Compositionally, I think everything works well. Just in the second half of these, I think we talked about probably the second half of each one, maybe having some little bit of tweaks. So again, good stuff to be talking about. I guess I should point out overall that with all of these, more than likely, and so far, we've been talking about ideas compositionally, how the instrumentation is used, sort of the aesthetic of the game, the pacing of the game, more creative things, which is excellent. That's exactly where we should be in the conversation. That means that you've kind of gotten over the hurdle of the technical stuff, which is all the files are there, formatted correctly, the main loops are set up to loop. We don't need to really discuss or how or why the files should need to loop. The idea is that the endings need to end in silence. That they're all in the same tempo, the same time signature, the same key, same instrumentation. Nothing's wildly, I mean, quite regularly, just probably, I mean, not every month, but maybe some month I'll get one or two compositions that are where each main loop is just like a completely different song. So understanding how it all is supposed to work in the game and how it's supposed to function, those are much better places to be in our discussion overall versus just because one of the challenges is the client may not have any clue why it doesn't work. They're not familiar with audio or audio files or sample rate or bit depth. It doesn't work in my game. It could be because they're not named properly, incorrect format, They think it stops, but instead there's just bounced a whole bunch of silence at the end of the file. These basic formatting things that need to be taken care of before you can even get to the idea of, does it sound correct for the game? Is it aesthetically work for the project? All right, let's try the next one here. So, the first one is you need some drums in here also. You need some rhythmic aspects because it'll feel like something has changed in the game. Like if I was in the battle or something like that, I would feel like the battle is just over, even though things were still going on. Especially if I had heard these overall. Oops. Does it pick up over here? And little drums come in a little bit. So let's start with this one. Alright, I'd say the main thing is to create more variation. The drums are the same all the way through. The phrasing, like this da 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 da, is also the same thing over here. That phrase. So you need to create more variation in the composition instead of just changing the instrumentation. It even feels like, almost feels like song form, where you have an intro, an 8-bar phrase, like a verse, and then it goes to a chorus or something like that, where you need more consistency within a particular cue, at least instrumentation-wise, while compositionally developing over time. Like it shouldn't, I mean, it can have the guitar here, but it shouldn't necessarily kind of come in and out. Where does it go away? Does it stay all the way through? Yeah, because it kind of disappears in the first half. First bar or so, or 2 bars, before it comes in here. So, and then the drums are the same, so just more variation in the composition versus having layers and muting them in and out. Because they all, even though it's different instruments, it's doing the same phrase. Da, da, da. So use the, again, because these 8 bars are going to be going around so much, you want to create as much variation through each 8-bar phrase. These, I think, especially going into something as loud as this is going to be quite quiet. Although it's at the beginning of the game, there's not much else going on, but you're going to need to have, it's going to be a big jump. As soon as the game starts, I'm going to, as soon as I hear this, I'm going to turn up the volume, and then it's going to drop into this, which has a huge kick drum. So volume and intensity-wise, you're going to want to create more level out of this. Yeah, it seems like each one, like intro 1 and 2 make up 3 here. No, those are not even lined up. No. But, come on, Logic. Why would you not line these up? There you go. There's probably something else in here. The flutes are in there. So, add more elements. You also need the drums. That's the other thing. You don't have any drums in here. So add a little fill drum intro to create that sort of build and energy. Because if you did this, oops. I don't know if that rhythmically will work, but hit something like this. And all of a sudden this kicks in, you're going to hurt somebody's ears. 3 endings. Wait. I left something. There we go. Cool. I like the third one. I like the third one because it adds the drums. And it adds that da-da-da. I mean, it's fine to end on that same phrase that you used throughout the cue. Oh, it's got the clap in there. This one's like the major-minor feel. Create the dissonance there. Yeah, I think those work with the dissonance. Now the problem would be that this one then sounds too major. Like this one now sounds like I won. Da, da, da. These sound like I lost. So, small points overall. I would say the drums would be the main thing to include in here and in your intros. Yeah, overall, everything, again, fits. Everything's going to loop properly, transition from one to the next. Main loop 1 is definitely going to need some more instrumentation, definitely the percussion. Create a little bit more build through the intros. You keep the ending 3 here, just kind of model 1 and 2 a little bit more like this one. Awesome. Very good. And we'll try one more here. We got a little preview there last time. I accidentally left it unmuted. There we go. Let's try these. All right, everything works. Everything transitions nicely from one to the next. A good energy all the way through. I would say the main thing would be to focus whatever the lead instrument is, kind of put the spotlight on it, bring it out in the mix, make it a little kind of forward overall to make it the focus. Like here, we got the piano line. I think, and the reason I say pushing forward, because I believe that the harmonic like chord progression from the piano is probably too far forward. And the piano, since it's like a higher octave, maybe it could even go another octave up to separate it, but I think mainly the harmonic progression could come back down. Here, you kind of have this organ line that could also come out more forward, and bring back the harmonic progression, the chord progression for the pianos. And then I think the third one, after the focus of the melodic lines here, I think the main thing with the third one is it doesn't really feel like it has much of a melody, or again, it just needs to be pushed that much farther out. Like I have the chords. Da, 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 da. Now there is this. There is some extra synth back there, almost like a guitar or a synth string kind of thing. Maybe it's there's another synth that sounds arpeggiated. Anyway, if there was intention of a lead melodic line here, then it needs to be pushed out farther, needs to kind of come out of the mix, or just needs some other instrument that creates that stronger lead line. Because without that focus, it does feel a bit repetitive, with the drums being the same and the like the same velocity chord progression. So that you definitely need that melody on top to create that change over the cues. The intensity, the kind of groove, all of that fits nicely. Makes you kind of feel, and it's got like a kind of cool synthy, spacey vibe to it, that I think fits the aesthetic of the game. The third intro looks, at least visually, looks almost like an ending, but let's see what happens here. Okay. That sounds like a mix issue, because it's just lower in intensity. Let's see. I think the first two intros rely on the drums too much. Like you got the chords to go up, but you could definitely use some more or the rest of the instrumentation. Whatever would be considered the lead to help also create that rise, because it's again, the drums are doing it. I would probably go away from the same kind of subdividing the beat, kind of doubling the beat, the rhythm each time with that clap, going from like the 8ths to the 16th, 30 seconds, just to again create more variation. Just change up the pattern as it builds, and none of that stuff really seems to be present on this one. Almost seems like a different synth. Oh, same thing here with the rest of the instrumentation. You have the organ going up, da 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 da, but you need other layers to help create that build, especially something in the higher register, because the organ kind of occupies the low end. Let's try 3 endings. I'd say the third one here kind of suffers the same thing as the intro there. The synth or whatever layer it is feels pretty low, and that clap just kind of sticks out there. So let me see. Yeah, you had a major feel. Oh, sorry, major. You had a minor feel through each one of these, and then it goes completely major. This definitely, I think, out of all the endings, sounds like I've won the da 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 da. But I lost the game at that point. There is no winning at least in the game as it is. This I think fits as losing, although it doesn't have like the same. Like this has got much more density and much more kind of layers and stuff going on in there. So I think that's what's like. This one almost feels. It sounds like different instrument. Well, it sounds like the same instrumentation, but it sounds very different overall. It sounds like everything's just moved up a couple octaves, then very major. This, I think, stylistically hits it on the nose. And this one just feels very like distant or far or small or something like that. So I think there's some balancing in the intros and endings because these are so like big and stereo and lots of layers and all that stuff. So you have to match that through the intros and endings. Yeah, these all work very, very well. I think you have great material to work off of and overall. And for everybody here, a good round of submissions, good information overall, lots of good stuff to be talking about. They didn't all suffer from the same thing, or they all had their pluses and drawbacks at different places, gave us lots of different material to talk about. Again, I think it helps just to see everybody else's versions and the things to work on and improve. You do have the opportunity of making revisions and changes all the way until the end of the month. So you can you'll get your feedback video, and you can take all of that, the suggestions and the changes, and work it into another revision. And you have the possibility of changing music and sound effects all the way until the end, especially once you get it into the game. Then you can see how well any of those changes work, and how it will fit into your version of the project. So I hope this encourages other folks watching the archive to submit, that it's constructive overall. It should be relatively painless, and just mainly focused on things that, and we really did hit more of the creative side of things, like the, again, it wasn't just like, oh no, this is just not going to work in the game. Everybody hit that main foundation, and it's just, yeah, things to tweak and change overall. So we'll leave it there. If you have any questions, I'll stick around after class. I will be switching over to the archive now, which will discuss the new assignments for week 2. We'll meet again on Thursday. We had a couple people show up on Thursday with questions, and if you have anything to listen to, this week's assignment has a little bit more moving parts to it, so it's always good to get a heads up, even if you have just bare bones kind of stuff as you're puzzling everything together. If you have any questions, let me know. If you can't make the class, send me emails. But by the end of this week, you will have the music and sound effects completed for both games. And next week, we will move into actually implementing things and setting it up so you can hear it in the game. So, all right, reach out if you have any questions. Other than that, I will see you again on Thursday. Thank you very much. All right, let's go ahead and discuss the new assignments for week 2. So we have a new project. We have a new game. We have a new soundtrack. A new style of game requires a new approach to the music. And so our game this week is called Angry Bots, and it is a demo that is provided by Unity Games. Again, this game is built in the Unity game engine. Next week, in week 3, we'll start talking more about the technology, and we'll discuss game engines and audio middleware and some of the software and tools that are kind of running all of this stuff in the background. And like I've said before, saying like game engine is like saying DAW, kind of, sort of, not really, but sort of. Basically, in the same way that a DAW is the tool that you use to make music, a game engine is the tool that a game developer uses to make a game. And just in the same way that there's Logic and Pro Tools, and they give away free projects, and like, here's some recorded music for you to check out and test out how our software works. They do the same thing with games. They can provide versions of the games that people can tear apart, and we can get in there with our music and sound effects. So our new game for this week is a different style of game, different approach to gameplay overall. In Angry Bots here, you are this mercenary infiltrating a robot factory. The robots are none too happy that you're there, and they are bent on your destruction, so they will come after you. And your job is to kind of go further and further into the game world. This is a much more complete game. There is more stuff going on. Let's see here. Where am I? More stuff going on than 2D platformer, or more like there's like a beginning, a middle, and an end. Where 2D platformer, the score would just go up and up and up. This one, there is like an ending to it. You can actually beat the level. It's not a full game. It's just like one level of what would be a much larger game. But it takes about 5 or 10 minutes to complete the first time. This one is kind of a much more futuristic, techie designed world. Lots of kind of sci-fi influences, robots and explosions and lasers and rocket launchers and sliding doors and technology and all sorts of interesting things for music and sound design. It's not probably an all ages, family friendly kind of game. Much more kind of dark and intense. And our main focus with the music is the idea of ambient and action, switching back and forth between lower intensity ambient music and higher intensity action music. And when I talk about ambient music, I don't really mean the style or genre of ambient music. Not like Brian Eno, Music for Airports, kind of just a slow drone that never changes, never does anything. Ambient just means less than action. Sometimes it's known as battle and exploration. But this is the idea of there's a period of time in the game where you're just kind of wandering around the level trying to figure out what's going on. And lots of games do this, where there's a period of time where you're exploring, and then all of a sudden an enemy jumps out and there's battle music. And the battle ensues for a particular period of time, and then you either win or lose the battle, and you move forward from that. So same sort of thing here. We have to, if you did nothing else in the game, if you just sat there in a corner and hid forever, you would hear this ambient piece of music. Ambient doesn't mean just a drone, just kind of slow and boring. It can have energy to it. It can have good instrument layers to it. It can have drums and bass and harmony, maybe even melody, but probably we'll leave that up for other pieces of music. But it can have structure to it. It can have development, and it really shouldn't just be one slow drone that doesn't do anything and just sits there. So there would be an ambient piece of music until a battle happens. And when one of the battle happens, one of these robots comes out to attack. And you'll notice that the battles are pretty short, right? So this guy wakes up, he comes to attack, you only hit him a couple of times, and he explodes. This guy comes to attack, and I kind of toy around with him a little bit, run away, let him chase you. And eventually, you'll either destroy the bad guy or the robot, or they will destroy you. And whenever these battles happen, the action music comes in. And then when the battle is over, the action music will leave and return back to just the ambient music. The ambient layer or the ambient cue will always be there, will always be playing. And when you fight one of these robots, then the corresponding piece of action music will come in. There are 3 different types of robots, and each one of them has a different action cue or action theme that's attached to it. And whenever you battle that particular robot, you will hear its action theme. And then when you defeat that robot, that theme will eventually go away. It'll fade out. So you have an ambient cue, and then you have 3 action cues that represent each of the different robots. They can play at the same time and will play at the same time. So you will, no matter wherever you are in the game, you will always be hearing the ambient cue. Then one of these battles starts and the corresponding action cue comes in. So we have to understand, how do we add or subtract this action music whenever we want. That's one of the main challenges here. We have to be able to get into a higher intensity action piece of music and then return back to the ambient piece of music as seamlessly and invisibly as possible. So, how does the game know when a battle is happening? And the answer to that is it uses health points. It uses, you have health points, and the characters have health points. You might not notice, but this yellow bar on his back is actually a game meter or a health meter. And it tells you how long it takes. A lot to destroy you in the game, because it's mostly just to test out and have fun with it. And defeating one of these robots doesn't really take all that much time. So we'll have to discuss how we get back and forth between this lower intensity ambient music and higher intensity action music. Let me explain each one of the robots. The first one here is called the Buzzer Bot. This is the kind of flies around, is sort of annoying. It zaps you with these little lightning bolts. These guys are called the Spider Bots. They're basically bombs on legs. They come after you, and if they get close enough, you'll either destroy them, or if they get close enough, they'll self-destruct. They really don't do much except for chase you around and become annoying. These are the most frequent kind of robots on the map. There's another one over here. And let's go inside here. So, and then here is the third robot. This guy is called the Mech Bot. It's this big RoboCop-looking robot coming down the way here. These I would kind of consider like a mini boss. They're kind of harder to destroy. You have to unload into them to eventually defeat them. And then there's just the same robots across the rest of the map. The good thing with the music and sound is we really only have to focus. I mean, you really are you see everything in the beginning of the level, and all of your music and sound effects will be populated through the rest of the game. So let's go ahead and bring up some of the other material. Let's see. Here's the PDF that you get. Hello? Is that not working? Shrink down. There you go. Okay. So here's the PDF you get. It discusses all sorts of different aspects of the composition of the project. You have action and ambient cues. Why do I keep turning away? There we go. You have action and ambient cues and a discussion of each one of those. How to play Angry Bots, hopefully, should be relatively straightforward, not too difficult to control. You can use the arrow keys to go up, down, left, and right. You can use the mouse to look around, and then left click or just click on your trackpad to fire. There's a couple of listening tracks as reference. Different classic games in the style of this kind of sci-fi action game. Musical style. Here we're really looking and focusing on intensity. We want to make sure that whenever those robots come after you, that it's really powerful and strong and intense. You need to feel like the danger of these robots coming to attack. Nothing too chill, nothing too laid back. Sometimes I hear some music and it's like, hey, robots aren't so bad. Let's go ahead and have a cup of coffee or something like that. And they're like, yeah, sure, that's no problem. which is not what you want. You want intense and strong and loud, and robots are chasing you around with lasers and missile launchers and all sorts of crazy sci-fi sort of stuff. So you want to match that aesthetic. On the other side of that is another thing that I get that is better, but it doesn't work too well, is like Robot Dance Party, where everything is like super hypey dance and not that dark or intense. It's like party time, and that doesn't necessarily work either. So intense and strong instrumentation. I have suggested instrumentation synths and pads and driving bass lines, gated effects, sweeping filters, bouncing delays, fast percussion, heavy distorted guitars, big fast drums, large brass and strings, cymbal swells and impacts, anything that portrays strength and intensity. Then there's descriptions of each one of the cues, which is basically what I'm discussing now, and how they'll play back. What I really want to get to is the asset list down here. There's screenshots and descriptions of each one of the robots and how they should sound, and just a general overview. Then the asset list. There's a total of 7 files that you will create for this. I mentioned 4 of them so far: the ambient cue, buzzer action, spider action, and mech action. They're each going to be 1 to 2 minutes long, and they will loop 16-bit 44:1 stereo. So don't think about this as 4 individual 2-minute long compositions. Think about it as one composition that can be broken down into 4 parts or 4 stems. So each one of these layers is going to contain unique instrumentation. You shouldn't repeat any instruments between the different cues, so that when you hear those particular groupings of instruments, or that thematic line or melody or instrument, whatever it is, you can recognize whatever robot's coming after you. You almost train the player with the music so that they can hear what's coming up next. So let me explain how these 4 files work, and then I'll get into these short stingers here. So when the game starts, if nothing else is going on, you are always hearing the ambient cue. Through the entire game, that 2-minute long ambient cue will be looping around and around. The ambient cue should be subtle. It shouldn't be too much in your face. It can still have a bit of rhythm to it. It doesn't need to have strong percussion, but it can maybe have some hi-hats or a arpeggiated bass line, or some sort of gated effect that will foreshadow the rhythm that's coming. And you should you want to lay down the foundation of the progression. This is going to map out how things are going to play back in the how all the layers are going to play back together. All right, so we hear the ambient from the beginning of the game. As soon as you've been attacked, you either shoot the robot or the robot shoots you, then the action music will come in. The action music will come in immediately. It will start playing from wherever it is in the loop, and you will hear action music. This point, you need the strong percussion. You probably need a couple of layers of percussion, bass line, harmony, and probably a thematic. I don't necessarily want to say instrument, like a melody, but thematic thematic line or thematic instruments, or something that tells you what robot is coming after you, so that you can give that sort of information and help the player. All right, so first guy, the battle starts, and as soon as he's destroyed, the battle ends. The music's going to start fading out at that point. Then these guys jump awake, the spider music will start, and as soon as they're destroyed, it'll stop playing and it'll fade out over time. So let's go ahead and load up some examples here. Talk my way through a couple of examples of what this might sound like. go. All right, so as stated before, you are going to have 4 2-minute, somewhere between 1 to 2 minute long cues or layers, or even maybe think of them as stems that can play back together and play at the same time. The biggest challenge here is going to be dissonance and clashing notes. You want to make sure that there's a lot of similarities between these cues. They need to all start at the same time. They need to end at the same time. They need to be in the same key, in the same tempo and same time signature, and they need to all loop together. They need to follow a common chord progression, because even if they're in the same key, if they're all headed to different chords at the same time, it's going to probably not work so well. So you need to, with all of the things that are the same, key, tempo, time signature, looping, starting, stopping, the things that are going to be unique are your choice of instrumentation. Each cue should have unique instrumentation that's only found in that cue. You really shouldn't repeat any instrument lines. You shouldn't copy anything, because when the game puts it all back together, it's going to double things up. Like if you have the same drum pattern in multiple cues, when you play them all together, then that drum pattern is 4 times as loud as everything else. So make sure that you have unique instrumentation, and then a unique composition. Each cue should have certainly a strong rhythm. That's going to be the most of the action part. And then a thematic melodic line or thematic instrument or thematic phrase or something like that that helps identify whatever robot it is. Probably a bass line to help, although you don't need necessarily a bass in all 4 of them. A chord progression, but you don't also need to put all of the voicing of every single chord in each one of the cues, right? So you write your chord progression, you're going to have 3 or 4 voices per chord. Well, all 4 of these don't need to have all 4 voices every single time. Maybe one of them is just the root, follows the foundation. Another one, you've got the 3rd and the 5th. Maybe another one, you get the 1st and the 5th, if you've got 7ths in there. And you can start, if you write out the chord progression first, you have a basic common structure or skeleton to work from. So let's go ahead and check this out. Just get started here. Let's play. Start with the ambient cue. All right, I am going to I'm going to play the part of the game, just mixing these up and down. And the whole reason this thing is going to work in the game is because when the game starts, all 4 of these pieces of music are going to start, and they're going to play together. They're going to reach the end and all loop together, so they're going to constantly be in sync. The only thing is, the player's only going to hear this first one at the beginning. The 3 others are going to be silent. Then the buzzer comes in. So let's do this. Game starts. Game starts, and you hear just the ambient cue. And then once you get attacked here, that's the buzzer bot, and so the buzzer music will immediately come in. And you're going to hear that buzzer music as long as the battle's going on. And then once you defeat that robot, it's going to start fading out. And the game is going to do this a whole lot better than I can and control it in the DAW. But it's going to fade that out. And whenever that robot attacks, that music comes in. So this is the buzzer by itself. So we've added the low strong strings. You got some big timpani hits in there, big low bass drums, and there's these little white noise sweeps somewhere, I think, in here. There you go. So it adds a little bit of layers. So this ambient cue is mainly made up of, has a hi-hat pattern in it, but mostly is a chord progression. This is outlining the chord progression. No, it's a couple of notes that are just kind of presenting the foundation of that chord progression. Here in the chat, it says, so that means we're making tracks separate, so that means the music can't clash. Yeah, you are probably best to think about it as one whole composition. So what I end up doing in my composition session is I'll set up a region just like this, like a particular length that depends on your tempo of your music, and you'll count out how many bars will fit, how many bars you want to use that will fit with between 1 to 2 minutes, and then just start adding instruments. I would often start out with a basic just piano. Just start writing your chord progression, even though it's going to end up probably a very synthetic and very electronic and all that sort of stuff. Start out with a piano or a basic keyboard patch. Write out your chord progression, maybe write a few melodies that could work with it, figure out what instruments you're going to use, and then just keep stacking them on top of each other so that it becomes one cohesive composition. But eventually they're going to be bounced out separate from each other so that the game can use them individually as it needs to. All right, so that is the buzzer. And once that buzzer is defeated, it eventually fades away back to the ambient. And then you go after the next one. So this spider pops up. When that spider pops up, the music is going to immediately add in the spider cue. It sounds like this. Hi-hat, bass line, a little melodic line that we'll hear is actually a double of the mech cue. Here it is with the ambient. And then this guy's destroyed. This guy chases around a little bit. When that guy's gone, the music will fade out. Until you get after this guy. And this guy is the mech bot. And he comes and he attacks, and it sounds like this. So with that one, you've got strong brass and strings. You basically have the high strings to match the low strings from the buzzer cue. You've got a strong lead melody. This one, where's it coming? Right about here. And you also have the ability to have 2 or even all 3 robots on the screen at the same time. So we could bring in the buzzer cue. Bring in the spider cue. And all 4 of these cues should be able to play together. No clashing notes, no clashing rhythms. Again, think about it as one cohesive composition that with multiple layers that can play at the same time. There are 3 other files that are listed in the asset list. The music buzzer stinger, the spider stinger, and the mech stinger. And those are there to help the transitions from the ambient into the action. The action cues are going to hit quickly, and you do not know where they're going to be in the music. So to help this transition, we add in stingers. And stingers are going to play when the action cue is introduced. So let me give you an example here. I'm going to divide this up like how it will sound in the game. Just kind of set this up so everything is set up correctly. Something like that, something like this. And then we'll put fades. So we got a fade out there, and fade out there, and fade out there. All right, so when the buzzer action comes in, when it comes in here, you'll notice that the buzzer, it'll come in probably in the middle of some phrase somewhere, doesn't have a strong impact, just kind of jumps up. So, oh, I was actually at the end of a sweep there. That's actually kind of luckier than it typically is. Turn off my fade there. Thank you. Let's play that again. So it just comes in there. And so to hide that sudden transition, we can throw stingers in here. And the game, again, the game's going to do this all for you. A stinger should hit have a strong impact at the front and fade out to silence very quickly. It's meant to distract and create a little bit of interest at that whatever the random point that's going to transition. Provides a little bit of consistency, even though it is kind of just going to be a random point. If you're familiar with electronic music and like drops and impacts and things like that, that is commonly what a stinger could be. Stingers are typically have a strong impact, maybe some low end, maybe it could be a drop. And then there's another layer or two on top of what I call like some modulation or some filtering or a pitch drop or a filter sweep or a synth arpeggiator or something like that. These are all kind of strong impacts. They should not be tonal. They should not be rhythmic, because since you don't know where they're going to be played, it might clash. So a strong hit, lots of reverb, tails out to silence. There's another one. And like I said, they are there to cause a bit of distraction as you're going from one piece of music to the next. So here's what it might sound like when played against the action cues. And again, the game does all of this for you. You just have to create the material. So it should provide a hit, and then the one should fade out, and the other piece of music will already be there. Here's another one. And here's a third one. So hopefully that gives you a good idea of where to start with the composition. I'm going to play one more here. Let's get rid of that, and this, and this. All right, here's another ambient cue. So this would be a good example. This would be a good example to say that the ambient cue doesn't need to be boring. It doesn't need to not move or do any or have any changes to it. Here, you can hear the outline of the chord progression. You hear a arpeggiated phrase. You hear some percussion, but it's not like a kick, snare, hi-hat pattern. It is sporadic and meant to provide emphasis. Here is the buzzer cue. Here it is by itself. So it follows along, it's got a little melodic line to it. It's got drums, that's probably the most important thing to add for the action cue. Here's a spider. This one's mostly drum kit. Mostly drum kit, got a lot of crash cymbal in there. And here's the mech. Mech sounds cool, it almost sounds like an alarm going off. You definitely have to watch out when all four of these are playing to make sure it doesn't completely overload the master. But a common progression, a common pace, a common rhythm to it that allows each one of these layers to be added and subtracted at any point. Then the game, whenever a new idea comes into play, it can just fade in the corresponding piece of music as necessary. So hopefully that helps in describing how the composition is going to be set up. I do want to show off a couple of things with the sound effects for the sound design this week. Please let me know if you have any questions as we go along, or if you're just watching the archive, then you can send me a message if you need any sort of clarification. So that's the compositional side of things. You also have the sound design, creating sound effects for Angry Bots, 22 sound effects. Again, this is, like I said before, because it's a little futuristic and robots and weapons and things like that, explosions, there's a lot of fun opportunity for sound design. So let me just load up the sound effects. And I would suggest that you do something similar to last time, where you would load the original sound effects into Logic and use them as reference. So let's see, I'll close down this session. Don't save. Get a brand new session here. Now, when you go download this assignment, you are going to get a folder that looks like this. It's called Angry Bots Original Sound Effects. And it's going to, you unzip it and it's going to have two folders. One is called To Replace and the other one is called To Use. There's a total of 60 some odd sound effects in the game, and I don't require you to do all of them. You can use some of the original ones to supplement them. So the one that's called To Replace, these contain the 22 sound effects from the original, these do contain the original sound effects, but these are the ones that you will have to do for the assignment. And the reason is these are the more interesting sound designy kind of sounds, if that really makes any sense. They are the more obvious weapons and robot kind of sound effects. The ones to use, these are some ambiances and interior shots. Then there's like bullet impacts and ricochets. And then there's also footsteps. So you're probably not going to win any awards off of your footstep design. You're not going to get hired off of your ricochet. Well, who knows? Maybe you would. But more likely, this is a focus on the music and the and more important sound effects. So something to consider, but we definitely are going to do and replace the to replace. I include the other ones there because you can and are encouraged to do all of it, so that whenever you show this off, you can say, I did everything in this game. Otherwise, some of the original sound effects will be there still. But let's just use the To Replace folder. I'm going to take all of these sound effects and I'm going to drag them onto a track here in Logic. Open, place all the files on one track, yes. It always comes up with, actually this one doesn't. If it comes up and asks you if you need to change your sample rate, just change the sample rates of the files, that's fine. You're going to bounce them out anyway. All right, then once you have the original sound effects on here, you would probably spend some time, you'd probably clean this up a little bit. They don't need to be right on top of each other. So take these and separate them out a bit. Oh, that didn't work. Well, Logic, come on. You can cooperate with me. There we go. Do that. Do that. And you don't need to watch me do all of these. But just trust me, separate them out a little bit so that there's a little gap in there. So when you bounce everything, you have a little room. Then you would create a couple of blank tracks down below. And build all of your sound design directly below the original sounds. But listen to the sounds as reference for what they should sound like, how loud they should be, what's the shape or like the waveform look like, how loud is it, how long is it, yeah, just the basic properties of that file. And then you would build your own sound effects down below. I'm going to cheat here and just drag these down. You would not do this. Don't do this. This is a bad idea. But basically, if I were to fake it, these would be all of my effects. And you definitely mute out the originals when you bounce. You don't want the original files in there. They're really obvious to hear. And you have, then you'd bounce these out and you'd have your sound effect. And you'd go through and design all of these. Let me actually play these. I think this is going to work. Let's see if these broadcast. Airlock door close. That did not work. Hold on. How about this? Let's try that again. There it goes. Okay, this is airlock door close. There are a lot of doors in the game, and there are all the Star Trek kind of doors that open and slide open and close and do all that stuff. So there's a door open. There's a door close, and the assignment has pictures of everything, so you can play through the game. You can see what's what. A lot of times you can get away with the close just being the reverse of the open. Maybe there's a little like chunk, like ka-chunk at the end as it locks closed. But with these, you can use with hydraulics, pneumatics, servos, motors, those kind of things give you those kind of great mechanical sounds. Ambience, exterior rain. It's a rain loop. 30 seconds. Yours doesn't have to be that long, but just a consistent rain clip that you'll hear when you're outside of the robot factory. Interior hum. This is when you go in. This is like room tone. I always think that sounds like the inside of a spaceship or something. Like, as if I knew what the inside of a spaceship sounded like, but I'm sure. Something like that. Flying buzzer destroyed. There's a lot of sound effect. There's a lot of explosions. So the two main things in the game are, not main things, but things that have a lot of sounds are doors, opening and closing, and explosions. So what I would suggest that you do when you go do the sound design is you should be familiar with like the Westar Music Library to get access to sound effects there. There's another resource called freesound.org, which is a website. It's kind of a community-driven website. Westar is great because it has a whole bunch. It has the Sound Ideas Library, which is a great, like, very high-quality sound effects library. Freesound.org is community-driven. There are lots and lots of sound effects on there. There's also lots and lots of very bad sound effects that are not worth anything. But there's also some very good stuff in there. And for the types of things you're trying to do, a lot of that stuff can be covered there also. So what I would do is say, okay, I need explosions. So go off and search for a whole bunch of explosions, bring them back in, and then combine them all together to make the sounds that you need. Don't work on one sound at a time. Don't say, I need a flying buzzer explosion. Go find an explosion, bring it back, edit it, name it, bounce it. Then go, oh, I need a mech explosion. Then go back out, get another file, bring it back in, edit, name it, format. Like, that takes too long to go back around and around and around like that. Do it in chunks. A lot of times when I do sound design, I'll spend one day just looking through sounds. Like, just go find my library of whatever it is. And I'll just go, here's 25 sounds that I'll eventually put all together. Then maybe the same day or maybe the next day, I'll go back and I'll just edit everything. Put them all together, layer them up, see what works. Then often, if there's time, I might have another day that's just like mixing and bouncing and formatting and delivery, like finalizing everything. So, so if you work in big chunks like that, it often makes the process a bit easier. This is Zap Electric. This is when the lightning bolt kind of shoots out and zaps you. Mech Alert. All of the robots have an alert sound when they recognize that you're there. They kind of wake up and attack. So there's kind of an alarm sound there. Mech Destroyed Explosion. It's an absolutely huge sounding explosion, which is good for that very large mech robot. These are patrol mech footsteps. As that thing is walking down the hallway, you will hear these footsteps for footstep 1, footstep 2. I think they completely cheated and used the same sounds. We could probably make it a little bit more interesting than that. Missile explosion. So this is when it fires at you. So it shoots its missiles at you, which is this shoot missile sound. So it fires them, and then it either hits you or hits a wall or something like that and explodes. The spider alert. Right, so a little couple of beeps as it wakes up. You don't have to do exactly the same thing, just kind of do some other stuff. I've heard very cool things where people have done like vocoded robot voices when these things like wake up and it goes attack or something like that. Spider destroyed explosion. These are the bombs on that's when you destroy it. This is when it self-destructs. I think that is a horrible explosion sound. It's a real big letdown compared to the other explosions. Proximity. This is when the spider bots are coming after you. They beep. And it's very important. Just make that one little beep. And you don't want it to be very long, because what happens is as it gets closer to you, the beep gets faster and faster. It goes beep, 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 beep. And so if you have like a long sound, that's just going to stack up and sound all sorts of crazy. So all you really need is one really short sample. Spider self-destruct, that's the bad explosion. Interior doors open and close. These are the Star Trek doors that slide open and closed. I always think that sounds like somebody's window being rolled up or down. Locked door opening. Once you get, you stand next to these computer terminals and you hack the computers, and it allows these locked doors to open. Player death. This is when you die. That's not true. That's a gunshot. That is the incorrect sound. Let me get that out of there. Player hit. This is when you take damage. Player shooting. This is the gunshot sound. It's pretty important with that sound. That is going to be a looping sound. And it is important that you match the timing of those shots, because I think it matches the animation or the muzzle flash in the game, which is this. So this is player shooting. Oh, muted. Right, so that's just a loop going around and around. You would probably be best served 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. There's 12 in here. Just build your shots right below that and just use the same timing so that it creates this kind of smooth loop overall. And the last one is, I think it's the last one. Yeah, terminal hacked. Right, just some sort of electronic sound as the terminal is being hacked. I've heard people like type it on their computers, or sounds like a keyboard, or there's a voice in there that says terminal hacked. I don't know why a computer would tell you it's been hacked, but whatever. So that hopefully, again, will give you a good direction for your sound design. Always make sure that you mute out the original track. Don't include the original sound effects in there. Create 22 sound effects for Angry Bots. And I think that should be it. That's certainly quite enough for me for this afternoon. We did the peer review of the submissions, which was always great. Again, it hopefully encourages everybody to submit also for next round. And then we talked about your Angry Bots and your Angry Bots music and sound design. So if you have any questions, go ahead and post them up in the chat, or send me a message. But other than that, let's go ahead and wrap it up there. And I'll see you again on Thursday. All right. Thank you very much.